Your Royal Highness, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure and honour to welcome you all this evening to the occasion of the RSA President's Lecture, one of the highlight events in the Society's annual calendar. I'd also like to very much welcome everybody joining us for the event on live webcast and invite you to take part in the discussion on Twitter using the hashtag RSA Climate. This year, we're absolutely delighted that Emma Howard-Boyd, who is chair of the Environment Agency, will take as her President's Lecture the theme of one of our most pressing current challenges, which is how it is that we can build resilience at a time of climate crisis. Emma will discuss the leadership and the collective action required on adaptation, which will result in economic, social, and environmental benefits. I'm also delighted to say that Sir Ian Cheshire, Chair of Barclays UK, the government's lead non-executive, Chair of the Global Resources Initiative, and most relevantly tonight, Chair of the RSA's Food, Farming and Countryside Commission, will join us, as will Sue Pritchard, the Director of the Commission. And we're looking forward to hearing both from Emma, of course, and in the discussion with Ian and Sue after Emma has finished her talk, and there will be opportunity for questions later. And we are especially pleased to be hearing from Emma this evening on the importance of, in particular, considering the physical impacts of climate change as a strategic priority. The RSA has a very long history of debate on sustainability and the environment, and continues to convene honest and future-focused conversations at this critical moment for those engaged in the triple challenge of climate adaptation, protecting nature, and people's wealth and well-being. Health and well-being, I should say. Maybe both. This year's President's event builds upon the very positive reception which the recent report of the RSA's Commission on Food, Farming and the Countryside received. And in its next phase, the Commission will continue to work with partners and key stakeholders to design and to lead change in our food and farming systems. So we're very much looking forward to hearing from you this evening, Emma. But just before we do that, it is my privilege and great pleasure to ask you to join with me in first welcoming the Society's President, Her Royal Highness, the Princess Royal, to formally introduce this year's President's Lecture.
Well, firstly, can I say thank you for joining us. A very good evening to you, and this is the President's Lecture. You'll be relieved to hear that it's nothing to do with me, but I always like to come because it is essentially very good lectures and debates thereafter. And this is a particularly interesting aspect from my perspective, not least of all because I grew up largely on farms, and land use of various sorts, seen a lot of changes, and I don't think I qualify as a farmer, but I do have livestock, and I do try to make them sustainable, both to me and to the countryside. That's a bit more of a challenge. So all this is relevant, not least of all the Commission report that's just come out. I'm sorry to say that I haven't had a chance to read all of that and the follow-up paper, which is even more interesting because that looks at the long term and where we might go next. But I think this evening's lecture is very much a part of that debate and the options that are available, and the perspectives will be many and varied. But the really nice thing about the RSA is that it contains that very broad spectrum of members and interests, and they contribute to the debate as much as the Commission. But I have to say, I take my hat off to the Commission. As Sue will tell you later, they really did it the hard way. I don't know how you put that together, or in relatively short space of time, given the complexities of what they did, because they're covering such a wide range of interests. But our speaker also has a wide range of interests and interesting background. So not just the chair of the Environment Agency, I think she got there by a whole range of different experiences, not least of all the boards and advisory committees, which included Share Action, Manhattan PLC, the Prince's Accounting for Sustainability Project, and Green Finance Institute, all of which are quite challenging organisations, but has worked in financial services for over 25 years in corporate finance and fund management. As Director of Stewardship at Jupiter Asset Management until July 2014, she was integral to the development of their expertise in the corporate governance and sustainability fields. So we look forward to hearing from her the critical challenges to protecting environment and, more importantly, supporting that sustainable development. I think the audience here, in whatever medium you're joining in, will all be interested in that. We hear lots of discussions, we see lots of headlines. We don't always get enough good quality information on what we can do about it. I somehow think that we're about to change that. You're going to learn a lot tonight. So Emma, thank you so much for joining us, and please give your presentation.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Your Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen. As it is Halloween, I will begin. It was a dark and stormy night. As a Category 1 emergency responder for flood incidents in England, dark and stormy nights are familiar to the Environment Agency. Just this weekend, thousands of people were protected from severe flooding as a result of well-targeted investment in flood schemes along the River Severn. I visited on Monday and saw how my colleagues worked around the clock to help protect communities. They showed why we are the fourth emergency service during flood incidents. The thesis of my speech tonight is that everyone in society, government, businesses and individuals, needs to put the climate emergency at the heart of everything they do. This work should not be in a box labelled environmental issues. It should not be given a cursory 10 minutes at the board meeting before everyone gets back to the business of business. The climate crisis is the business of business. It must become a default part of our thinking. Otherwise, the dark and stormy nights of the coming decades will not only be much scarier, they will have an insurmountably damaging effect on communities, nature, and the economy. But I am not the ghost of Christmas yet to come, here only to conjure a nightmarish apparition of the future. I am positive about our prospects. I'm the chair of the agency that looks after the environment in the green and pleasant land of the Lake District, the Norfolk Broads, the Jurassic Coast, and the 29 Rugby World Cup finalists, England. My message today is that there's still everything to play for. Last week, on the northern Danish coast, a 120-year-old, 720-ton lighthouse was put on skates and moved 70 metres inland to save it from coastal erosion. The lighthouse that was rescued from the sea sounds like a children's book, but drone footage of the vast minaret-like structure gliding slowly across sand dunes made it a global news story. The Rubjerg region of Denmark is popular with tourists. It was decided that the cultural and aesthetic value of this non-operational lighthouse was worth securing for another 40 years. When it comes to coastal erosion and flood planning, the priority for authorities is to protect life. But saving this lighthouse was not that. It says something about the way people want to live. When we talk about the horrors of the climate emergency, and Extinction Rebellion are right that we must tell the truth about this, we should also think about the resilience of what we value now. The coastline has never been static. There has always been coastal erosion. Rivers change direction. There have always been floods and droughts in the UK, just as there have always been typhoons in Japan. So when you read an article about the latest record-breaking climate event, it often comes with a sidebar of analysis titled, "Is this climate change?" Last year, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said we have 12 years to hold global warming to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And even if we do, the physical impacts, like storms and heat waves, will increase. The IPCC's report is not only momentous because of what it says, it is a towering achievement because it managed to get scientists and government officials from 40 different countries to agree on a single document. Last month, the IPCC released a new report saying that once a century sea level events will be annual events by 2050. So while we can agree that such things have always happened, we must also agree that the multiplying effect of the climate emergency means we have new questions to answer. A farmer might overcome a few dry summers with some tactical decisions about what to plant and where. But a long-term shift in climate means fundamental changes to the business or running the risk of ruin. We will be able to talk about that a bit more shortly when Ian Cheshire and Sue Pritchard join me. Ian chairs the RSA Food, Farming and Countryside Commission, who this summer warned the climate emergency calls for a radical 10-year plan to transition to a sustainable food system with more government support for healthy produce. Adapting does not necessarily require new technology. That humanity's response to the climate emergency will involve technological breakthroughs is not in doubt. But a business that pins all their hopes on the R&D department is a risky investment. Global economic losses from climate disasters are already estimated at $520 billion a year. We already have the expertise and resources to overcome many of these. So it is an economic and moral failure that the international community is not looking at this effort as a strategic priority. When Greta Thunberg talks about cathedral thinking to avoid climate breakdown and says we must lay the first stone without knowing exactly how to construct the ceiling, she is right. However, we are not working blind. We already have a lot of the infrastructure and technical expertise that we need. Take Typhoon Hagibis, for example, which I know Your Royal Highness saw firsthand. This was one of the worst typhoons in Japanese history. The news here focused on the rugby matches that had to be abandoned or postponed. But irritating though that was, it was small beer compared with the monumental triumph of modern civic planning that reduced loss of life and allowed Japanese society to quickly get back to normal. My own son is a journalist working in Japan, and he wrote, Hagibis comes in the wake of the Category 4 Typhoon Faxai just a month ago, which knocked out power to 60,000 homes in Chiba Prefecture and was considered one of the most severe storms to make a direct hit on the Tokyo area. Hagibis covers an area 4 times the size of Faxai and is a category above. It is Faxai's angrier cousin, and it comes for Tokyo full of rage. It is the first time in my life I prepared for a weather event of this scale, but I don't think it'll be the last. Last year, I visited Japan and walked in the vast underground flood silos, 165 feet under Kasukabe. Each silo holds 13 million gallons of water and clears 7,000 cubic feet of water a second, helping to keep Tokyo's flood risk down. Obviously, not every country is as wealthy as Japan, but that doesn't mean they don't have a lot of expertise to share. In Bangladesh, deaths from tropical cyclones declined more than 100-fold in 40 years, from 500,000 deaths in 1970 to just over 4,000 in 2007. This was achieved by developments in early warning systems, cyclone shelters, evacuation plans, coastal embankments, reforestation schemes, increased awareness and communication. As well as being the chair of the Environment Agency, I'm also the UK's Commissioner to the Global Commission on Adaptation. And last month, the GCA released a report Adapt Now, a global call for leadership on climate resilience, suggesting that investing $1.9 trillion in adaptation globally from 2020 to 2030 could guarantee $7 trillion in net benefits. The Commission says these benefits come in the form of a triple dividend. They avoid future losses, generate positive economic gains through innovation, and deliver social and environmental benefits. At the Environment Agency, we take our role in realising these benefits for England seriously. The costs of making the country more resilient to flooding is far smaller than repairing damage. The National Audit Office says for every pound spent on protecting communities, around £9 in property damages and wider impacts is avoided. If it weren't for flood and coastal infrastructure in England, the January 2017 tidal surge alone could have caused £37 billion in economic damages. Preparing for the impacts of climate change is necessary, whatever climate scenario plays out over the coming decades. But if we don't reduce humanity's contribution to the crisis, we will be fighting a losing battle. As it stands, the world is not on course to meet 1.5 degrees by 2030. 2 weeks ago, Mark Carney said, we can observe where the market is in terms of pricing the transition. It's at least 3 degrees or 3.75 degrees. It's probably north of 4 degrees. That tells you something in terms of the sum of global climate policy. To hear such a profound statement from the Governor of the Bank of England should do a couple of things. Firstly, it should frighten you. Secondly, it should focus your mind on what we need to do. Climate change must become a default part of our thinking. In every business and government decision, whether it relates to operational or capital expenditure, leaders need to be asking, firstly, is this course of action resilient to the physical impacts of climate change? And is it reducing our greenhouse gas emissions? 2 weeks ago, Jeremy Darroch, Chief Exec of Sky and Chair of Business in the Community, said, when a business leader is frustrated at the disruption caused by Extinction Rebellion, or they find that extreme weather is making it hard for their business to operate, they shouldn't only look to government to solve the problem. Business survives and thrives because we are all part of a connected ecosystem, and that means it's not just the responsibility of other institutions to tackle climate change. It is our responsibility too. Indeed, the future of our businesses, and more importantly, our planet, depends upon it. The UK government must be applauded for being the first G7 country to set a net zero target by 2050. Indeed, this sort of action is infectious. The French were quick to follow. And this month, I was pleased to announce that the Environment Agency has set itself the goal of becoming a net zero organisation by 2030. We will adopt a tough, internationally recognised definition of net zero that includes the carbon we produce, currently 44,000 tonnes a year, and the carbon we consume through our supply chain, 136,000 tonnes a year. We will reduce our emissions 45% by 2030 and offset what remains through activities including tree planting, restoring soil quality and peat bogs. This does not mean that we will stop building flood defences, currently 80,000 tonnes of carbon a year, pumping water out of people's homes if they flood or around the country to alleviate drought, 17,000 tonnes, travelling, 12,000 tonnes, or heating our buildings, 9,000 tonnes. That we have chosen 2030 is important. It won't be easy, but we will show how it can be done. We will find new technologies earlier. More importantly, we will create an effective working model and the language needed to share best practice. I've already spoken to businesses in our supply chain who are looking at their plans in light of our decision. Last week, I was speaking at an event with the Chief Exec of Sainsbury, who said that he could see many straightforward economic reasons for reducing carbon emissions, but one in particular struck me. 10% of Sainsbury's energy use is through its fridges. Reducing the carbon impact of that by reducing the amount of electricity the supermarket uses is an economic goal before you even consider the environmental benefits. It seems obvious when it's articulated with a retailer's common sense. But that's another one of the problems. The climate emergency is not only complex, the different languages we use to talk about it muddy the waters further. This creates unnecessary barriers between sectors and government departments. which is nowhere more apparent than in my own industry, financial services. Earlier this year, I was on a panel with a financial journalist who said that every day the news desk would receive more press releases than they could possibly cover, offering financial products that were sustainable, green, ethical, and other such things. However, the press releases were so full of jargon that working out the real-world impact was not compatible, of these products was not compatible with the newspaper's deadlines. Last month, the Department for International Development found that 68% of UK savers want their investments to consider social and environmental impacts alongside financial performance. It also found that many people aren't investing in this way because of a lack of clear and simple information and common terminology on sustainability and impact in investment markets. The incoming president of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, puts it very simply. She says the world could be roasted, toasted, fried and grilled by climate change. The financial world not only needs to be paying closer attention to this, it needs to be communicating about it more clearly. The filmmaker Richard Curtis recently announced the launch of Make My Money Matter campaign, which will help people choose sustainable investments that benefit people and the planet. He said, "We are on the edge of a second consumer revolution where the public realises just how powerful their own money can be. This connection between people and the real-world impact of their savings will only grow as the climate emergency becomes more apparent." Looking at the rise of Extinction Rebellion, Jen Bendel, Professor of Sustainability Leadership at the University of Cumbria, wrote, "Executives in the private, government and charity sectors all face growing frustration at the clear net impotence of our actions on climate change. This stasis anxiety will grow as the news on extreme weather and the latest science becomes worrying." Yesterday, a poll for the environmental lawyers Client Earth suggested that more than half of people say climate change will influence the way they vote in the general election. Unfortunately, the barriers to action are all too often political. Looking at Donald Trump's reiteration of his plans to pull the US out of the Paris Agreement last week, it is easy to feel dejected. A reminder that action is going to require political will and alliances, as well as scientific and economic arguments. But there are reasons for positivity. Across North America, cities and states are putting in place resilience measures to protect against impacts like wildfires, floods and hurricanes. And they are also courting investment in clean technologies. There are potential allies everywhere. Over here, I was extremely pleased to see the Prime Minister's announcement that he will chair a new Cabinet Committee on climate change. He said, "I want us to become the cleanest, greenest society on earth and inspire countries around the world to follow our lead so that our children can breathe clean air and benefit from the wonderful flora and fauna of this earth." It is positive that we saw signs of cross-party support for aspects of the 25-year Environment Plan relating to water and waste in the recent parliamentary debate on the Environment Bill. It is also good that the UK is part of the new coalition of finance ministers for climate action, looking at revenue opportunities to tackle climate change. The very fact that there is an international coalition of finance ministers for climate action is an indication of where we are. The new Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva, has said this coalition provides an important platform for finance ministers to share best practice. Across the public and private sectors, there is a lot of good work underway on climate change. It is good to hear discussions about the resilience of infrastructure like prisons, hospitals and schools. But existing efforts must become more than the sum of their parts if they are going to inspire support beyond Whitehall. In the National Security Capability Review, the government launched the Fusion Doctrine. This says that the government will take stock each year of the UK's positioning on national security in terms of resilience, threats and opportunities to take decisions about strategic prioritisation. The central position of the Cabinet Committee on Climate Change makes it easier to coordinate action and champion action across government and therefore create better join-up with the private sector. The non-executive directors of government departments have the leverage to make those cross-sector connections too. And the COP, the climate discussions in Glasgow in December next year, is the perfect opportunity for businesses that have made commitments to show that they are delivering. The climate emergency is now a fundamental threat to every area of modern life, so our response must be a default part of everything we do. One of the leaders I look to is the former President of Ireland, Mary Robinson, who said to The Guardian last year, "I don't think, as a human race, that we can be so stupid that we can't face an existential threat together and find a common humanity and solidarity to respond to it, because we do have the capacity and the means to do it, if we have the political will." So I applaud David Attenborough, who said earlier this year, "The Garden of Eden is no more," Greta Thunberg, who said, "I want you to panic," and Extinction Rebellion, who have appropriated Rabbi Hillel's famous quote, "If not now, when?" Because bringing these issues to the front of people's minds gets us past debating whether or not the latest natural disaster is climate change, and focuses minds on what action we must take to reduce the risks and prepare for new extremes. We need to get better at clearly assessing climate risks and opportunities, and better at pooling our expertise and resources across communities, sectors, and international borders. If people would rather put a lighthouse on skates than spoil the view, then humans have what it takes to overcome the climate emergency. But no one can wait for leadership tomorrow. We must all get our own skates on today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emma, for that honest and challenging call to action. And joining us on stage now is Sir Ian Cheshire, who's already been introduced to you, but of course, to me, he's our chair of the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission. I'm going to start with a question for you, Ian, if it's all right, and give Emma a chance to catch her breath. Even though we were writing about food farming in the countryside, we put in a little section in our report about the sorts of leadership that we thought was appropriate for these times. Why did it seem important to you for us to be making those sorts of statements?
Well, I think in many ways the connection between what Emma's talked about and our work on the Commission was a sense that increasingly these are topics and ideas which have gone past the can we talk about it, do we actually know the answer? The challenge is why aren't things happening? Why isn't the action being developed as well as the understanding? And I think what became clear was that there is a challenge of leadership here, but it's a leadership model that needs to be thought about, I think, not in the old school of, you know, hero emerges or Moses presents tablets and tells everyone what to do. So to my mind, there were three things that we sort of quite clearly saw, which is that firstly, leadership is now much more diverse and it needs to be much more inclusive at any level. So you need a lot of different people in the room to really make sure you're actually going to get some action. So the idea that there's some superhero leader is going to emerge and save us all from this is not true. It's actually about everyone being leaders and deliberately getting diversity, not because it's a nice tick box exercise, because you see the whole beach ball, you get the whole answer, and you'll get better quality answers. But the second thing that also comes across is that if you just have a really lovely, cosy chat shop, it'll make people feel good, and it feels like a lot of the climate change conversations have been echo chambers of worthy people talking to each other. What it actually needs is some courage. Leadership is a very difficult and interesting thing to sort of practice, because on the one hand, you want to involve people, you've got to take people with you. But at some point, people and teams and groups of people have to have the courage to do something where they don't, as Greta said, they don't ultimately know how this is going to work. You have to take your first steps and you're going to go, right, and I'll probably learn, I'll probably adapt. But it is better to take the first step. It is better to be moving and learning and adapting than sitting waiting for some perfectly researched Whitehall evidence analysis piece, which you'll be waiting forever. So courage at a group level, courage to do things which aren't necessarily that popular to start with, and do involve losses and trade-offs. And I think one of the things we found was as an independent commission, we could honestly say, look, there are some really tricky things here. How do you tell a farmer who's invested massively in one way of farming that they have to reinvest in a different, more, we think, more sustainable form of farming? Now, we can help with that, we can invest in it, but we shouldn't pretend this is some sort of switch where we go, oh, it's all right, we'll get the price of solar panels down, everyone can have an electric car, and we've sort of cracked it, job done. This is going to be quite tricky, and I think you have to have the courage to say it's going to be tricky and the courage then to do. But the other thing, final thing I'd say about leadership is, and we saw this throughout the food system, the farming system, and debates on countryside, is this really requires leadership at every level, but it particularly requires leadership at local levels. And I think one of the fascinating things about watching Extinction Rebellion sort of push up the pressure levels is that there is a tendency when you look at something as epic as some of the issues that you've described, and didn't realise I was alongside the Princess Royal I was in Japan in the typhoon, which was jolly impressive, particularly when they threw in an extra earthquake at 6 o'clock in the evening, which was, I didn't know that was coming. And what it sort of told me was that all of these things, what you need above all is local solutions and local answers to particular issues, because this otherwise looks too big and too impossible a set of things to challenge, and people get disempowered. And I think the positive side of XR, and even for those that have been disrupted by them, is the sense that actually at all levels, yes, we're not all going to be the Prime Minister or the President or whatever, and this will require a lot of international action, but actually all across the board there are opportunities to lead. And I was really struck by some of the things we shone a light on in the report, and I would definitely urge you to read particularly the Field Guide to the Future part of it, which is case studies, is local people got on and did stuff, and actually it happened. And it happened because there was a local group of leaders. And it's interesting, in some situations you think, well, that'll work, and it doesn't. And the overwhelming reason why it didn't work, there weren't enough local leaders. And I saw that in the business world. It doesn't matter if you're the CEO, if you haven't got the leadership all the way through. So I think the challenge for us is, this is our leadership challenge. As one of our commissioners said, the first generation who actually know what we should do, and the last generation to have the ability to do something. So we have to provide the leadership in this space, but it's a collective leadership.
Absolutely. I mean, it can feel very, very challenging, some of the messages that you were just sharing there, Emma. But there are, as you're saying, Ian, really inspiring examples of people who are already doing things around the country, but they're not very good at speaking up. And I think that's why when we went around the countryside on a bicycle, hunting them down, that's how we found those stories. We had to go looking for them, and we had to explain very often to people that what they were doing was remarkable and was extraordinary. In fact, there are a couple of people in the audience here this evening who are doing those very things that we emphasise and highlight in our report. Where do you look for inspiration, Emma? Where do you find those inspiring stories of leadership?
So I have the huge privilege of travelling up and down the country very regularly with my role as chair of the Environment Agency. And again, at that local level, it is so brilliant to see the many, many different ways that people are responding to this challenge. So I get that sort of dose. My best days, particularly at the moment, are when I'm out of central London in communities, seeing projects, or like I was on Monday, alongside the Sevens, seeing how we are working alongside communities and other emergency responders to respond to the challenges that we face. I think we as the Environment Agency know we've got to get better at telling those stories as well. Often we've hidden some of our flood defences and haven't told the things that we have created through that lens of climate change. I found some historic notices on flood defences where we've perhaps put a bit more detail, but we tend to tell it through the story of nature, which is just as important, but we need to make people aware that when they're walking around the edge of a beautiful reservoir or nature reserve in Kidderminster, that the banks are protecting the community from the risks of flooding, and making sure, again, that we're appealing to all generations. I think one of the things I've learned so much over the last couple of years is the brilliance of young people at holding us to account. I met Greta earlier this year, but I've also gone out of my way to meet young people in different communities up and down the country to hear their views on the role that we as leaders need to take.
Yes. I've got, as you know, 6 children, and they all have partners, so I have a rather vocal focus group at home to hold me to account, so I spend so much time in London. But this kind of leadership is... Oh, did I say that out loud? I'm sorry. Sorry, kids, if you're watching. But this kind of leadership can be really, really hard work. We were at the same conference at Sainsbury's, weren't we? And there was something that one of our commissioners, Judith, said at that conference, which has really stuck with me since then. And she said, if our customers and colleagues knew what we know, what would they want us to do? And that really made me think quite hard about what it is that we know and how overwhelming that can sometimes feel. Taking leadership up when you have that evidence in the backstory can be really, really tough. So why do you keep stepping up, Ian? We've already listed your extensive leadership roles. Why do you keep stepping up to do what is actually hard work?
But it's 2 things, actually. I mean, it's the most important stuff that, you know, we get to in our generation sort of deal with. And secondly, I mean, it is tough, and I don't think anyone should pretend that sort of getting stuff to change is a walk in the park, because it deliberately systems, revert to a place, and there's a lot of dynamics in the system to keep them in the place. So if you're going to change a system, that's a massive piece of disruption you have to put in. But it's also the most satisfying thing if you can be involved with it, and the most, I think, underrated in terms of people are worried about what they can and can't do. Oh, we can't change that. Well, actually, you can. Actually, quite a lot of this stuff you can change. But there is a real reluctance for people to take that step. And one of the things I think the leadership sort of challenge for many of us is to give lots of people permission to do lots of stuff. And you can't do it all on your own. But if you can change the climate, literally, of opinion, the first phase of the climate leaders group on corporate leaders group on climate change I did, it was really striking the number of people in government who said, well, hold on a minute, you're actually a business person who wants to talk about climate change. That means it's okay to talk about it. That created enough room for then the next bit and the next bit. So if you can keep moving the agenda, you will create space. And then I'm also pretty optimistic about the youth generally in the world in terms of their capacity to innovate and help us out of it. And they're giving them permission and the tools and resources to actually make a difference. And I certainly saw, when I was trying to work on sustainability inside B&Q and Kingfisher, it wasn't the director of this, it was the buyer who found a way to get rid of 500,000 tons of polystyrene that we were getting through by repackaging garden plants. And it was just, I didn't come up with that idea, he came up with that idea. And those opportunities, once you create space, I think you can be a lot braver than people think. And there's a lot of hesitancy, I think, to take the first step, but we need to move.
And I've been overwhelmed by the number of people, whether it's people working for the Environment Agency, our supply chain, others across government who've gone brilliant about our announcement, our commitment to net zero by 2030. And I hope this becomes a little bit of a race, and that we all encourage each other to take these steps. But I know that it's going to free up particularly our staff to come up with ideas as to how to achieve our net zero commitments, and that's fantastic.
Thank you. Let's take some questions from our audience now. If I can see some, yes, we have a roving mic and peering out into the distance. Have Vicky over there with a question. Can you see Vicky's in that corner with the raised hand? Shall I take a couple of questions and then we can take them all together?
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Go on, Vicky.
So I'm Vicky Hurd from Sustain, the Alliance for Better Food and Farming. And you're talking about inspiring leadership. So naturally that turns me to the election. And if you were the leader of the parties, which would be your number one manifesto promise in terms of climate and nature emergency?
I'm going to give you a moment to think about that while we take a couple more questions.
Good.
You can, yeah.
Alison Park from Lowsizer Farm in Cumbria. I wonder what the panel think we can do to support our farmers, because at the moment it feels like we're being vilified and we're doing really good work.
You had a question down the front. We'll take that one.
Yeah, Matthew Taylor. I'm interested in your perspectives on economic growth and sustainability. So Emma's been emphasising that, you know, we know a lot now about what is likely to unfold. Something else we know as a country is that we're about to enter into a period of population ageing, where the proportion of people in work compared to the proportion of people who are retired and the growing proportion of people who need care and health, and that will create fiscal challenges for us. So I'm interested in your view as to whether or not this is really what has to happen in relation to sustainability can be incorporated within our existing economic model, but just involves some changes around the edges? Or does it involve a deeper questioning of the way in which we think about economic development?
I suggest we start with the farming. Yes, let's start with the question from the farmer. Well, I think that's a question we sought to address in our report.
We absolutely, thank you for that, because we're very keen in terms of the Commission to stress that we see farmers as completely crucial to the answers, as opposed to sort of the villains of the piece. But sort of echoing some of Matthew's comment, they are currently operating within a system that makes it extremely difficult to do other than they're doing. And if we don't change the incentives and the structures and the support, then why would things change? And the only person that will then sort of be squeezed out is the marginal farmer in the marginal place. So we've got to find a way, because it's sort of the old thing about only 1% of the population work in agriculture, but over 70% of the countryside that you see as a result of agriculture. So you've got a small bunch of people doing a very crucial thing, and without going overboard on this, my personal view is that the only real upside on the exit process is that we get to set our own environmental and agricultural policies for the first time in 50 years, which is why we did the commission. So there is actually, weirdly, an opportunity now to think of a different way of supporting our farmers through what we've called for in this transition. So absolutely central to this, and I completely agree that they get vilified as the wrong end, but actually there are also, from what we saw, some amazing examples of innovative farming going on, different systems, different thinking. So I'd hope that this is going to be this revolution that we call for in the shape of agriculture. It will come absolutely through working with the farmers. Do you want to answer try the other? Are we going to answer the other two?
Do you want to dive in and give Ian a chance to think about the other two?
So from a farming perspective, I completely agree. There's a real opportunity. The Environment Agency has been working with our department, DEFRA, to look at the opportunities that come out of CAP reform. We're very interested because we have responsibility for flood and coastal erosion and water quality. So I think there's some very interesting things that we could do where we're all working together in the right sort of way. I think the economic question, I've been very clear in what I said earlier. I think we need to operate in a fundamentally different way. Easier said than done, but I think we are beginning to see businesses, governments start to operate in different ways. And we've got an example in New Zealand where thinking through growth through a different lens. We've got examples here where we've got the Dasgupta review that will be published, I think, at some point in the autumn next year, looking at the economics of biodiversity and nature. So, but all of these have to start leading to change. I think the work of the Natural Capital Committee and thinking around natural capital accounting, again, all of these are pushing in the right direction, but we need to move at pace on this. To the question of what's the one thing that you can do, I think that is such a challenging question, because fundamentally we need to do so many different things. So I think it comes back to putting this into the heart of decision making, not just as the environmental nice to do, but fundamentally part of finance. Again, whether it's a government or a business, it has to be there. And to date, we still have too many examples of it being an afterthought, an add-on, not designed into the way that we do business and we operate as organisations and governments.
Look at the economic question.
Yeah, I think, Matthew, there's one element which is not an either-or, as in there are some no-regrets moves in the old economy that you would do. You know, would you like to be more efficient, use less resources? Absolutely, yes. So there's a sort of early phase, and when we were looking at this through lens at Kingfisher, it was, you know, would you like to save money on an electricity bill? Yes, please, thank you very much. I'll take all of that. But fundamentally, I think there will be a limit to that sort of incrementalist approach, and I think there is then a challenge saying, how do you reperceive an economy in a way which is much more fundamentally circular to start with? And then secondary, I think you are going to start to look for different measures of what success looks like, and the sort of absolute performance of GDP is not going to be it. I mean, if you ask a room of people here, you know, what would you like for your children and your children's children, the answer is probably not a higher GDP. It's, you know, will they be happy and healthy and survive? So I think we are at the beginning of this, and I think, unfortunately, it falls into the very hard because you have to redesign entire systems, and systems are, you know, we've spent a lot of time talking about, systems are so difficult to change that you have to do thoroughgoing redesign and re-education. So I'm optimistic that we are beginning to see this evolve. I think we are seeing increasingly a digitalisation, dematerialisation of the economy, and increasingly a realisation that just straight take, make, dispose, linear growth is ultimately unsustainable. So, but I think it's difficult painting the picture for people today, you know, in the same way that if you went to a peasant society and told them about Google, they would find that quite hard to compute. And I think we have to paint the picture of what the next economy looks like, because we do need an economy. On the political side, I agree, and because of the system side, it's very hard to pick one thing. Actually, funnily enough, the nearest I would get to it, it would appear to be what Boris Johnson has actually said, which is that if he's Prime Minister, he will chair the government climate change committee at cabinet level. Because ultimately, I think that these systems are so difficult to change. Unless you've got serious political will at the highest level and you want to make it happen, it will be hard. So a personal commitment from a really empowered and powerful Prime Minister is probably the most important thing you could have. And it happens that we've got the benefit of COP26 happening in Glasgow next year, which is an irresistible stage for a politician to paint Glasgow full of green Union Jacks and rhinos and God knows what. And I think, you know, that there are opportunities to show up, and if it is a post-Brexit, for Britain to demonstrate a bit of leadership in this space. And I think that is quite an attractive political message, and I would thought all the political parties should be up for that.
So I'm going to pinch Chairman's prerogative because we haven't got really much time left. But both of you are stepping up to take leadership on behalf of the UK on the global challenges we face. As you've already indicated, things that we're talking about here are global challenges. We have global supply chains for our food, but for practically every other commodity that we rely upon. So, as briefly as you can, given that it's an enormous question, what are the most important things that you think the UK can be doing right now in the face of the challenges, but also in the face of some other large countries around the world, which might remain nameless, but it's the other side of that pond, who are backing away from the actions that are needed? How do we take up the global leadership that's needed on behalf of the UK in the face of all of that?
Again, it's about acting. It's about getting on and delivering. And I think we have to recognise that the UK has done a lot in this space, albeit it doesn't stack up to being enough. We have to recognise that and then start moving towards actions on the agenda. And that is at every single level. So, you know, you can start off with our government. We're both non-execs for different departments. You lead the cross-government non-execs. At every level, we have to, hold the mirror up and say, well, what can I do in my current role to lead on this agenda and act? Because it is so massive. And that's in my darkest moments when I'm overwhelmed by the challenge. I hold up the mirror and go, right, what can you do today? What is your equivalent of going on climate strike? And, and making that difference.
Look, I think we tend to sort of downplay the UK a little bit, which is that we are number 5 or 6 biggest economy in the world, but we also have this extraordinary reach in terms of soft power, and you'll be allowed out to the station shortly, don't worry. But I think what the UK can do is 2 really important things, which is it can provide the evidence of best practice and toolkits and things which it's done. So, you talk about catchment management for water. The UK has done an amazing job on that. It's also got one of the best examples of offshore wind anywhere in the world. So we've got practical examples of things, and I think particularly actually going to be interesting in agri-tech. I think the UK is going to potentially lead the world in some of these areas. So we've got our own capabilities, but we've also got, I think, an incredible ability to convene other people, and I think that's one of the things that we're looking to use COP26 for, is to say, right, we had this conversation about how much deforestation does the UK cause through imports of palm oil and soya. And, it's not a very encouraging number, but it is, our monthly, our yearly imports of palm oil are equivalent to India's monthly palm oil. So we can be brilliant, and if we don't impact the other people, this makes no sense. And actually, it plays to a curiously good British skill, which is that actually we're quite good and internationalists and reaching out. And even in the States, the States, ironically, has got more money going into solar PV and research than anywhere else on the planet, because it's not just about the president. We can reach other people, we can reach other networks, and we should be confident as a nation to go out there and say, look, this is a global challenge, and one of our things that we can bring as the Brits is an ability to get people together and form alliances around this, and particularly in areas where we're strong, like finance and tech. We've got a lot to offer, and I'm pretty confident that we can do a better job on that.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm afraid we have run out of time. Thank you both very much for what was a very honest, telling the truth presentation to us, and a very honest summary of the very practical things that we can do. The phrase that you invited us to dwell on for our Commission's report was that we can be both radical and we have to be practical. And I think that chimes very much with the point that you were making at the end there, Emma, that if we get up every morning and look in the mirror and say, what am I going to do today? What am I going to do that's really practical? Then we've got some hope. So we have an opportunity to continue the conversation downstairs in our lovely new coffee house, Rothmells. Can I ask you to remain seated while the Royal Party leaves, and then just stay seated in the auditorium for 5 minutes while we progress to drinks reception downstairs. And finally, would you join me please in thanking Emma Howard-Boyd and Sir Ian Cheshire.